The Dallas Mavericks are coming off a season where they reached their first NBA Finals since 2011 when they won their first and only NBA championship. Luka somehow continues to get better every year, and he's got a decent argument to literally be the best player in the league going into next season. Kyrie proved to be the co-star he needed, and the supporting cast around him is young, it can play defense, and it's only getting better. And overall, the front office for the Dallas Mavericks has done a great job of transitioning after the Dirk Nowitzki era.
Yeah, it helps when you can land a guy like Luka Dončić, but as we all know in the modern NBA, it's who you surround your stars with, and the Mavericks have done a great job over the years.
Before we start talking about how the Dallas Mavericks rebuilt after Dirk, please give the video a like, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss out on any new videos. The last couple years of the Dirk era in Dallas, gotta be honest, they were a little bit rough. They made the playoffs in 2016, but they were quickly bounced by the Thunder in just 5 games. And then in the 2 years after that, they won just 33 and then 24 games in 2018. A big part of that was Dirk was not the player he was in the past. I mean, he was in his mid-30s to late 30s at the end of his career, and we're spoiled by LeBron and Steph and KD balling out into their mid to late 30s, but that's not normal.
What happened to Dirk is natural.
Exactly.
These three are not natural.
And the other problem with the Mavericks was after they won their title in 2011, I always bring it up during this era, why did they just keep trying to throw a band-aid on the wound and throw together past all-stars that were just completely washed?
Because when you can't get current all-stars, you get previous all-stars. I've always said about these Mavericks teams, like if you take whatever their roster was in 2015 and you took every version of those players from 2012, they'd be like one of the best teams in the league. Like, go back 4 years from whatever year they were, and their team would be insane, but they were all washed is the problem.
I mean, just to rattle off the guys you may have forgot played for the Mavericks during this era: Vince Carter, Monte Ellis, Raymond Felton, Richard Jefferson, Jameer Nelson even stopped there for 26 games, Chandler Parsons, Rondo, Amari Stoudemire, David Lee, Darren Williams, Harrison Barnes, and Andrew Bogut. They just kept bringing them in, and I'm sure like half of those guys you don't even remember them in a Mavericks jersey.
So those 24 wins they got in 2018 ended up being the 3rd worst record in the league, but in the lottery, they fell down a couple spots to number 5. The Hawks actually got the 3rd pick where Dallas was supposed to pick, but you know, it was a pretty stacked draft at the time. It was at least seen that way. You know, DeAndre Ayton out of Arizona, Marvin Bagley out of Duke, Luka coming from Europe. People kind of didn't really know what he was going to be because, you know, he's a European guy and they still kind of had that stigma. Full disclosure, I thought he was going to be terrible. Maybe one of my biggest misses in terms of my takes ever. I thought he was going to be like Mario Hezonja.
Damn. I mean, I wasn't that harsh, but the player who I thought was better was Trae Young coming out of Oklahoma, who we just made the video on, was just incredible at Oklahoma, put up crazy numbers. Then you also had Jaren Jackson Jr., Mo Bamba, Wendell Carter Jr., and Colin Sexton. Fast forward to draft day, the Mavericks wanted Luka so damn bad, they traded up with the Hawks to go get him. They sent their 5th pick and a 2019 protected 1st round pick to move up to 3rd to draft Luka. And we got to expose ourselves as we often do with some of our awful takes. We both thought the Hawks won the trade.
Big time, yeah.
I mean, obviously you just said you thought Luka sucked, and I was super high on Trae Young, so I was like, you know what? I think Trae Young will be just as good as Luka, if not better, and they get the pick next year. They won the trade, but
people for a couple years tried to make the argument. It's like, well, both teams are happy with what they got.
Right.
And my thing, when it became obvious like what both players were, it was like you traded a Corvette for a Lamborghini.
Right.
It's like both teams got something of great value. One team definitely got something of a lot greater value.
And the narrative at the time, like, it was a fun narrative. You have Dirk, who was set to retire here soon. He hadn't announced any retirement at this point, but he was going to retire here soon as the greatest European player in NBA history, basically undisputed at this time.
Yeah, sorry, Tony Parker.
Yeah, and then you have Luka Dončić coming in, who could be the future greatest European if he lived up to the potential. So it was a fun narrative. Also throw in here, it gets talked about more now, but at the time it was just an afterthought. thought. Jaylen Brunson with the 33rd pick out of Villanova. What a damn draft for the Dallas Mavericks.
Unbelievable draft. And in the offseason, they'd finally bring in DeAndre Jordan after coveting him for a couple years. Not as good as their draft day moves, but at the time still seemed like, okay, decent signing.
And then they finally signed Dirk to a 1-year, $5 million deal. Like we said, hadn't fully announced his retirement, but basically this was the sign. One last ride for Dirk in Dallas.
Now on to 2018-19, Luka Dončić came in and immediately shut my dumbass up with one of the best rookie seasons in NBA history. 21.2 points per game, 7.8 rebounds per game, 6.2 assists per game. Looked like a future superstar right away. Took him only 7 games to register his first 30-point performance when he dropped 31, 8, and 4 against the Spurs. Won Rookie of the Month in November, and then would proceed to win the award every month of his rookie season. Also, just had that insane shot against the Blazers to force overtime at the end of December. They ended up losing the game, so get Dallas.
Back when we could actually say that the last year.
Can't do that anymore.
And then in January, he registered his first triple-double. He put up 18, 11, and 10 against the Bucks. It only took him a week later to get his first 30-point triple-double. He puts up 35, 11, and 10 versus the Raptors. And then a week after that, again, puts up 35 against Cleveland. Just ridiculous that he was already doing this. And I also got to mention, dude had a nice dunk package his rookie year.
Yeah, I've been seeing people talk about this on Twitter, but Luka actually could kind of get up his rookie year. He had that one insane dunk against the Nuggets where he dunked on their entire team.
I mean, he was much skinnier back then.
Yeah.
It has to be mentioned.
Yeah.
He has been looking skinnier in off-season photos.
Okay, those are the Ben Simmons jump shot videos. It's the new ones, right?
Yeah, it might trick us, but we'll see going into next season. But yeah, he could get up. And then in February, kind of a shocking trade. They go out and they get Kristaps Porziņģis from the Knicks. They send out Dennis Smith Jr., DeAndre Jordan, Wesley Matthews, and 2 future firsts to get him. And this trade wouldn't end up working out, but it was a very exciting European duo going into next season. I know Porziņģis was coming off the ACL injury, so he didn't play the rest of this season for the Mavericks, but he still made the All-Star game the year prior, and he was only 23, so very exciting stuff in Dallas. Then Dwayne Wade and Dirk were named honorary All-Stars in the All-Star game. We were talking about this a little bit before. It's a fun gesture. I mean, I don't know. I'm fine with it, but it's really?
I loved it.
We're giving out participation trophies to 38-year-olds. Come on now.
2 very legendary, one of one 38-year-olds. And you know what? The moment in the All-Star game where Dirk hit those back-to-back deep as threes, worth it. I loved it.
Yeah, I'm just hating. I'm just joking, but it was a little bit funny to see, to be honest. And then before the Dallas Mavericks last game, the worst kept secret in the NBA, got let out when Dirk announced it would be his last home game for Dallas. It's really hard to think of a player that's done more for one franchise. I mean, I guess you could say Kobe or Steph, but I mean, Jordan,
Jordan did. Yeah,
Jordan as well. But Dirk, 21 years with the Mavericks, the longest tenure for a player by one team. The Mavericks were an awful franchise before he showed up there, and now they're one of the better run franchises in the NBA. Also shout out Mark Cuban, he did a lot for them, but Dirk did a lot for the city of Dallas in this Dallas Mavericks franchise.
And there was no replacing Dirk, but Mavericks fans could at least look at Luka and think, we got our guy from the future. He'd go on to win Rookie of the Year basically unanimously. Trae Young managed to steal 2 votes from him, but you got Luka, who's a future superstar. You got Porziņģis, who looked like a future superstar in New York before he got injured. And that offseason, the Mavericks really didn't do a whole lot because they didn't have their pick due to the Porziņģis trade, but they signed Porziņģis to a 5-year, $158 million deal. Also re-signed Maxi Kleber, Dorian Finney-Smith, and they bring in Seth Curry from the Blazers. So nothing major, but definitely a team to watch going into 2020.
2019-2020, that was the year Luka just made this insane jump. Dude goes from having that great rookie season, he was very good, to a top 10 player in the league and maybe top 5, considering the dude finished all NBA first team, 28.8 points per game, 9.4 rebounds, 8.8 assists, made his first All-Star team, like I said, first team All-NBA, had 5 40-point games this season, in 2 40-point triple-doubles. Problem was Porziņģis did struggle to stay 100% healthy. He showed some flashes, like the duo showed a little bit, but the health wasn't there. Tim Hardaway Jr., he was solid for them, and Seth Curry proved to be a nice pickup. So you go 40-27 when the NBA suspends the season, and they were actually the last game of, like, not technically the regular season for the NBA, but before the bubble.
Yeah, because that Jazz Thunder game, it got delayed. Like, it didn't even start. But when that happened, the Mavericks were playing some team I don't remember off the top of my head.
The Nuggets.
Oh, it was the Nuggets? All right, cool. They're playing the Nuggets. And of course, we get that iconic image of Mark Cuban on the sideline, seeing that tweet on his phone and just being befuddled. I mean, if that's a genuine reaction, it's an all-timer.
Yeah, that was amazing. So going into the bubble, the Mavericks weren't at full strength. I mean, to be fair, a lot of teams weren't, but they lost.
I was going to say, we didn't have Trevor Ariza. You don't see us complaining.
I know. Trevor Ariza would have made the difference. We would have beat the Lakers. But for the Mavericks, at least, Dwight Powell was out with a ruptured Achilles, and then Willie Cauley-Stein said, you know what? I'm focusing on my health. I'm not going to the bubble. And in the final games of the regular season, they weren't very good. I mean, they got torched by Harden, and we remember they got torched by Dame when he dropped 61 on their heads.
That drop coverage
didn't work.
Was not working whatsoever for the Mavericks. But they finished as the 7th seed out west. That matches them up with the Clippers in the first round. Game 1, Luka balls out, but the Clippers still get the win. And unfortunately for the Mavs, Porziņģis would end up tearing his meniscus in this game. He would go on to play games 2 and 3, but after that, he was eventually shut down. Let's put the next 2 games. So in game 4, Clippers have a chance to go up 3-1, but Luka hits that incredible step back 3 in overtime. Kind of like his coming out moment in the NBA. I feel like that was the moment. Like, everyone knew how good he was, but that was the moment that he like announced himself as like one of the up and coming superstars of the league.
I mean, yeah, this whole series, he basically did that. The dude was ridiculous, and I know numbers were inflated, but when he's almost averaging a 30-point triple-double to playoff debut and hit game winners, like, that is just ridiculous. Problem is, though, game 5, the Clippers drop 154 on them, blow out the Mavs by 40. That score doesn't seem real, but again, the bubble. They eventually win the series in 6. Still a great season for the Mavericks, though. I mean, you have your best season in years. Luka was absolutely incredible, but the only downside, Porziņģis' health, like, you already had the concerns coming off the ACL injury, and then you had the torn meniscus on top of that. Wasn't a great look going into next year.
Especially for a guy with his build, too.
Right.
Long, lanky. I mean, just NBA history is littered with guys like him that can't stay healthy. During the draft, though, the Mavericks did take Josh Green with the 18th overall pick. Didn't do much his first couple years in the league, but he eventually found a spot in the lineup. And unlike the prior offseason, the Mavericks really didn't do anything major. I mean, they sent Seth Curry to Philadelphia for Josh Richardson. They also acquired James Johnson in a 3-team deal. I mean,
yeah,
it's whatever, honestly. You can't get excited or disappointed by it.
Right.
Following season, Porziņģis would miss the first 9 games of the season, still recovering from that meniscus. And I mean, this was the half COVID year, so, you know, a lot of players in and out of the lineup due to the health and safety protocols. So the Mavericks start 1-3, 9-14 through their first 23 games of the season. They did start to pick things up in February, went 8-4, slowly clawed back into the playoff picture. Around this time, they actually also traded for JJ Redick. They sent out James Johnson. Do not remember this in the slightest.
Well, I think it was JJ Redick's last stint in the NBA. He got traded there from like the Pelicans.
It better be, because if he played somewhere after this, I don't remember that either.
I think he played like 13 games and really wasn't part of the rotation, but he was a Dallas Maverick. There is a photo with him and Luka, so that was before like AI was a huge thing, so it did happen. But overall, regardless of JJ Redick not doing much for them, they had a strong end to the regular season. They win 12 of their final 17 games, and they go all the way up to 5th, which is crazy. Early in the season, like 2 months into the season, they were 14th, and you shoot all the way up to 5th. Again, though, like, I don't want to tear into the guy, Porziņģis.
Don't want to tear into him, because then he'll tear something.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, hell, he was already out the first couple games of that meniscus injury, missed a few games with a stiff back, and then had an ankle injury at the end of the season. Overall, missed over a third of the season, only played 43 games. Now, keep in mind, the season, it was 72 games, but that is not a good look, so just keep that in mind for later.
On to the playoffs, though. For the second straight year, the Mavericks match up with the Clippers, and this playoff series was one of the most bizarre you'll ever see in NBA history. The Mavericks took the first 2 games in LA behind behind some amazing performances from Luka. And then in turn, the Clippers took the next 2 games in Dallas. And then back in game 5 in Los Angeles, the Mavericks took it after Kawhi airballed a 3 from the corner and got his ass chewed out by Rajon Rondo. And then in game 6, the fucking Clippers win again, and then they win game 7 on their home floor. If you were betting on this series, you lost on probably every game.
I lost too much money on that shit.
In that offseason, the Mavs decide to make some major moves to the front office. Donnie Nelson gets fired as GM, and then Rick Carlisle, he resigns, so that means he's probably going to get fired. And they bring in Nico Harrison as their next GM, and then Jason Kidd as their next head coach. Both of them kind of controversial picks for different reasons.
Yeah, Kidd was coming off 2 previous stops in Brooklyn and Milwaukee where he really didn't light the world on fire at all. And in fact, the Bucks got significantly better after he left and after they got Budenholzer. And then Harrison is kind of just a controversial pick because he hadn't been an NBA executive before. He had been a long-term executive at Nike, and apparently he had a really good reputation of working with NBA stars and building positive relationships with players, so that's why they hired him. He was also one of the executives that botched the recruitment of Steph Curry back in 2013, so missed out on probably the second biggest superstar in the NBA. Like Nike needs him, but you know Nike would have liked to have him.
Yeah, that's still a big miss, but he got his shot, and besides that, they didn't make a ton of moves to the roster. They didn't have their pick from the Porziņģis trade, and they really only brought in Reggie Bullock, but still some major changes to the Mavericks franchise. 2022, that'd finally be the year that Luka and the Mavericks found some playoff success. They hovered around 500 for a lot of the season after an initial hot start, and they actually had a losing record going into 2022, but they picked it up big time, won 10 of their next 11 games, followed up going 7-3 in February, but after that, they eventually decided the Kristaps Porzingis era in Dallas was over when they sent him to the Wizards, only for Spencer Dinwiddie and Davis Bertans. Honestly, that's basically like a salary dump. I know Dinwiddie was a better player at the time before now, where dude's ass, but that's kind of a salary dump given the player Porzingis is.
Yeah, and especially considering the expectations when he arrived in
Exactly.
Dallas. But both Luka and Porzingis in the past couple years have talked about how it wasn't working on the court. I mean, like you just said, like under 500 at the new year, like it wasn't working. And Porzingis, I think, has gone in and talked about like how their relationship wasn't the best or anything. Like they didn't actively hate each other. They just didn't get along. So I mean, if it's not working, better to, give up on it and try something new than just keep slamming your head against the wall.
They would still end up winning 52 games though. Main part of that, Jaylen Brunson finally had his breakout season. He averaged 16.3 points a game, comes up huge in the playoffs. Dinwiddie was pretty good for them for the short time he was there. And Luka actually injured his calf the last game of the regular season, so they wouldn't have him the first couple games of the playoffs. But this dude, Jaylen Brunson, really had his coming out party. He drops 41 in game 2 to even the series, and then he follows that up with 31 in game 3 to put him up 2-1. Dude carried the Mavericks while Luka was out.
Yeah, Jazz would tie the series in game 4, but then Luka was able to come back and get going. The Mavericks would advance in 6. First playoff win since the title team in 2011.
That is crazy.
Really shows how they kind of just gave up and just tried to land big name free agents after that title team instead of building naturally like they eventually decided to do. And the good times would continue. The Mavs played the Suns in round 2, a series that they were not expected to win. Because remember at the time, this was the 64 win, best record in the league by a long shot Phoenix Suns coming off an NBA Finals berth, so they got that year of playoff experience. I think most people expected probably Suns in 5, maybe 6.
Yeah, but the Mavericks pulled the shocker. They go down 0-2 early, but then they respond, win the next 2 to tie it at 2 apiece. Game 5 was a blowout win for the Suns, so now they're facing elimination in Game 6, but they respond with a blowout of their own, setting up the Game 7. The game didn't really have like a long-lasting impact, but just for whatever reason, it's one of the more famous games in recent NBA history because the Mavericks just whooped their ass, just straight up.
I actually would disagree with you and say it hasn't had a long-lasting impact. I don't think the Suns have been the same team since. I think every once in a while in sports, you get a team where they lose a game, either like they get obliterated or in such heartbreaking fashion that for 4 or 5 years afterwards, the team program is just never the same. Like Florida in college football, after they lost to LSU, where the kid threw the shoe. They have not been the same since. The Phoenix Suns have not been the same since. And now they're in the worst situation in the NBA.
I guess, that's very true. It didn't have any long-lasting impacts that season because the Mavericks go on to lose the Warriors in 5. But yeah, it completely kind of destroyed the Suns team and made them completely blow up that roster.
Made them blow up a 64-win roster. Crazy.
So still a very good season for the Mavericks. I mean, you make the conference finals again. You get your first playoff series win since 2011. Like, things are going well, and it looks like you got your co-star. Like, it didn't work out with Porziņģis, but now you got Jaylen Brunson, and then he immediately walks.
Okay, in fairness to the Mavericks, everyone pilloried the Knicks at the time for giving Jaylen Brunson this contract. It was seen as a wild overpay. Hindsight's 2020, so you can't hate on the Mavericks too much for this, but he's your second best player at this point, and you let him go for zero. For absolutely nothing.
Yeah, and it's like really easy in hindsight to be like, oh, Jaylen Brunson's insane. Like, the dude's an MVP candidate now, but I don't know if he would be this great fit next to Luka long term. They both like the ball in their hands. Kyrie, we'll talk about later, much better as a two guard, much better catch and shoot player. So
already had a lot of experience playing that way with LeBron and KD too.
Exactly. So I think he was a much better fit anyways, but still, that it's just not a good look. And they didn't really follow that up with any more good moves, because immediately they take Wendell Moore in the draft, but then you flip him along with Sterling Brown, Marquise Chris, Trey Burke, and Boban to land Christian Wood. This was the era where Christian Wood, it's like, oh, is he just, you know, stuck on that Rockets team and he's actually this good player? Turns out it was just empty stats.
It was 100% empty stats. And good Lord, they sent out 5 players and a first-round pick.
Yes.
For Christian Wood. I mean, they're not 5 great players by any means, but Marquise Chris and Trey Burke are slightly below average players, and
I guess
Christian Wood's trash.
Yeah, I will give them credit though. They did make one good move this offseason. That was when they traded into the draft where they'd take Jaden Hardy. He's looked very good his first couple seasons, and I'm excited to see him next year in the rotation. I think he could become even better and be a key piece for them. So they did make that, but just not many good moves this offseason. They signed JaVale. That was an overpay, and then
if your best free agency signing is JaVale, you had a bad offseason.
Yeah, exactly. Lose Brunson, trade for Wood. That didn't work out. You overpay for JaVale. Not a good offseason whatsoever.
Yeah, and 2023 would turn out to be a big disappointment for the Mavericks. Losing Brunson hurt way more because he immediately had an insane impact on the Knicks. And their other big problem was that they sucked at rebounding. They were dead last in the league in rebounding. I mean, when your best rebounders are Luka and Christian Wood, it's not great.
Bueno.
Yeah, Luka literally led the team in rebounds per game. He was incredible, as always, 32.4 points a night, his career high at the time. He had that one game against the Knicks where he dropped 60 points, 21 rebounds, 10 assists, had that incredible comeback. Overall had 3 50-point games. Like, he had an MVP type season, but the team just wasn't good enough. They floated around 500 for most of the season. Even brought in Kemba at one point. Like,
this was the point where we got to see the old Mavericks where they just bring in washed stars.
When you're that desperate, things aren't going well. And eventually, the front office makes one of their best moves of the recent Mavericks era when they trade for Kyrie Irving. They did get him at a great time because his reputation was not great at the time. I mean, part of that's because of his own actions, and part of that's because the Nets were an absolute dumpster fire. But all they had to trade out was Spencer Dinwiddie, Dorian Finney-Smith, 2 seconds, and 1 first-round pick to get back Kyrie.
Buy low. And there was initially some optimism for this duel, but the rest of the season didn't really go that well. This duo did get off to a good start though. Kyrie won his first 2 games in Dallas, but after that, I mean, everything just went downhill. They were dealing with injuries, their defense suffered big time. They had a chance to make the play-in, and they probably could have pushed for it if they really wanted to, but by the end of the year, they were sitting Kyrie, they were sitting Luka. They ended up tanking. Keep their pick because it was top 10 protected. They ended up trading back to get Derek Lively, and they dumped Bertans' contract in the process, and this is why Adam Silver can never curb tanking.
Right.
Because it f***ing works.
Yeah, I mean, this move in itself set up, you could argue, like that finals run in a way. Like, I know Derek Lively is not their best player, but he was one of their most important players because they desperately needed a two-way big. They also pick up Rashawn Holmes. He wouldn't play much for them, but I liked that they were like, you know what? We're the last team in rebounding. Maybe we should actually get some bigs and not play Dwight Powell at center. And then the big move of the offseason, you re-signed Kyrie to a 3-year, $126 million deal. Of course, there was like the Lakers rumors that floated around, but you bring back Kyrie, you also re-sign Dwight Powell, you trade for Grant Williams, a sneaky move. You pick up Derek Jones Jr. at like the end of free agency when people kind of thought like maybe he'd be out of the league soon. An incredible offseason for the Mavericks.
The Mavericks would go on to have a solid start the next season. They started 8-2 and were tied for first in the West. Kind of slowed down after that. Grant Williams was just not a fit for this team. Kyrie got injured in December and missed some time. Their defense was still suffering quite a bit. Season completely flipped though when they acquired Daniel Gafford and PJ Washington near the trade deadline. Finished the season 21-9 with them in the lineup. Went from a bottom 10 defense to a top 10 defense.
They finished 50-32. That was good enough for the 5th seed, and they matched up with their good old friends, the Los Angeles Clippers again. This time though, they got their revenge. I mean, it did help. Kawhi was just completely banged up, only played 2 of the 6 games.
I mean, it's like, does the day end in why?
Yes.
He's always hurt. Why are we surprised?
The series was tied 2-2 as the Clippers went into Dallas and won Game 4. That was kind of shocking, but then the Mavericks respond. They blow out the Clippers in Game 5, and then Kyrie takes over the end of Game 6 to win that series. Follow that up with beating OKC in 6 in the second round, and now they're back to the conference finals, and they dominated the Timberwolves. Luka had that game winner over Gobert in Game 2, and they were back to the finals for the first time since 2011. Their run would end there, but still an incredible season. You get back to the finals, and you know, it's not right back to the finals. It still took them over a decade, but in NBA, like if you're not the Lakers, you're not like a huge name out there, it's a pretty damn good turnaround.
Blazers haven't been since 92.
Exactly our point.
32 years we've been waiting. I'm probably going to wait 32 more at this rate.
Yeah.
But, you know, really quickly before we wrap this up, what do the Mavericks need to do to get to that next level? They obviously brought in Klay this offseason. I get the move because in the finals, it was really Luka or Kyrie on offense or bust. Like PJ Washington couldn't hit a shot. Tim Hardaway really couldn't hit a shot. Derrick Jones Jr., his 3 started to dry up. So you bring in Klay, one of, if not maybe the best spot-up shooter in NBA history. But also one of their biggest problems in the NBA finals was the fact that their defense fell back down to earth when they were playing against a team as deep as the Boston Celtics, and I just worry about late in a playoff series when you have Luka, Kyrie, and Klay Thompson on the court.
I think it could work, but we'll have to see. That defense is going to be a big question mark. You also bring in Najee Marshall. Underrated move. Dude's a solid defender. And then you get Quentin Grimes in a deal where he sent out Josh Green. Did lose Derrick Jones Jr. That could prove huge for that defense, but overall, I like the moves. I mean, we'll see how Klay works. And I'm mostly just happy to see the Mavs finally have a good team around Luka, because for many years, dude was struggling on his own out in Dallas. So how would you grade the Dallas Mavericks rebuild after losing Dirk? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, please consider giving a like, and hey, while you're here, check out some of our other content as well. And don't forget to subscribe to Synthetic Sports.